Just so all of you know, I'm rather perturbed right now because I just made like a 7-minute video and the sound didn't work. So the sound better be working or you're not going to hear about Jesus tonight because I'm not doing it again. Okay. So as I said, today is a rest day, so I'm not going to be running today, which I thought that was going to be a hallelujah moment, but I've kind of been like, oh, I need to run. Oh, I gotta run. It's something that I have to do. I'm addicted, blah, which is weird because I'm never like that, but stop talking about running. Okay. I'm going to talk about a message that I was listening to last night when I was running by Jon Courson. It's on 1 Peter 4:12-14 about suffering into glory, which this is what those verses say. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the painful trial you are suffering, as though something strange were happening to you, but rejoice that you participate in the sufferings of Christ, so that you may be overjoyed when his glory is revealed. If you are insulted because of the name of Christ, you are blessed, for the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. Okay, so he talks about suffering on one side and glory on the other, and how in the culture that we live in today, when we think of living a glorious life, which the Hebrew word for glory is kabod, which means heavy, weighty, or substantial. So we all want to live a life of substance, but the culture that we live in today says that in order to have a life of substance or value or worth or a life of joy, then it needs to be absence of suffering, which is absolutely the opposite of what Jesus' word says, which is what we need to go after and live by. But clearly, if you look at the lifestyles of the rich and famous, those who don't... That's my husband. He started singing a song in the middle of my podcast, so, or YouTube video, whatever this is. Okay, anyways, so lifestyles of the rich and famous. If you look at those people who, don't seem to be suffering that much, who have everything given to them on a silver platter, you look at their life and there's really nothing substantial about it, and probably they cry themselves to sleep every night, so... just be encouraged by that. Okay. No, not really. That's bad. Okay. So Jon Courson brings out that God doesn't replace suffering with glory, but instead he transforms the suffering into glory. And if you look at John chapter 16, Jesus gives an example of this, a really good illustration of a woman giving birth, and says that, a woman giving birth, it's her time, and so she's very sorrowful and goes through a lot of pain, but then once she has the child, she doesn't remember that pain because it is replaced with joy. And I can attest to this, having Elijah in October. Birthing is very painful, but once I had him, it was like I can't remember the intensity of the pain. Like, I remember that it hurt, but it doesn't register in my mind anymore. It's like something, like a dream, kind of. Like, did that really happen, or what? Because I'm just so focused on him and I have so much joy because of him. And so that's the thing. He was causing me so much pain, but then God transforms it into joy. And so that's what he does with the suffering in our life presently. He turns it into joy. And Jesus actually modeled this, the whole illustration of giving birth. Hang with me. The thing which is a problem or pain presently will be turned to joy. And Jesus actually... or not Jesus said this, but in Hebrews 12:2 it says, Jesus, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. And so he knew that that suffering was going to be transformed into joy because of who he was talking about and who he knew, which is God the Father. So this next part is what I found really interesting, but when I told my husband Keith, he was kind of like...
I just said it was a strange way to look at it.
Okay, he said it was a strange way to look at it. But it is strange, but I like it, so I'm going to tell you. So during the pain on the cross, Jon Courson says, a child was born. And he goes in to talk about the physiological aspects of being on the cross and how the pectoralis... I'm not an anatomy major, okay? So you have your wrist out, like, on a cross. But of course they'd be out like this, but you can't see them in the video, but you get it. Like, nails through the wrist, and also through the ankles, and what that would cause would be a strain on the pectoralis major muscles, which would actually cause paralysis. And so they would nail their ankles to the wood with their knees bent so that they could lift up to get a breath, and then they'd go back down. Then they lift up to get a breath, and they'd go back down. And then eventually, when the Roman soldiers wanted to put them out of their misery, they would just break their legs so they couldn't lift up and get a breath anymore. But when they went to do that to Jesus, they found out to their dismay that he had already died. And so that actually goes back to Old Testament prophecy and shows that Jesus's bones were never broken, which is awesome. If you look up the prophecies in the Old Testament and New Testament, they're freaking awesome. But that's not what I'm talking about. So then one of the Roman soldiers puts a sword through Jesus' side, and it says, "Out flushed water and blood." And Jon Courson says these are the same fluids that occur in childbirth. First the water breaks, and then the lady gives birth, and there's a lot of blood. And so what he points out is, even though Jesus didn't give birth the way women do, he did in a way, in a sense, because he's called the last Adam. And so if you look at the illustration or the symbolism of that sword piercing his side, you look at the first person who has ever birthed was actually birthed out of a side. You look at the story of Adam and Eve, and Adam's bride was birthed out of his side, from his rib. And so Jesus, being the last Adam, birthed his bride, which is us. And so I think that's so awesome that we're a part of God's family and we are his bride, and how much suffering and pain he went through. But he went through it because he knew of the joy that was set before him so that we could have a personal relationship with him. And that's just so awesome. And just to really meditate on everything that he did for us and continues to do for us, even though we smack him in the face so many times. He's just awesome. So, yeah, that's Suffering into Glory. And this is day 5, I think, of my half marathon training. Tomorrow, I'm going to be running 4 miles. And so I will update you then. Have a wonderful night, day, morning, afternoon, whenever it is you're watching this.